Do. Alright, where was I? Right. Audiobook.
The Kazan Uprising, 968 to M41. In the early hours of the morning of the 12th day of the 5th bilunar cycle, the imperial planet of Kazan was riven by open revolt. All across the planet, covens of chaos cultists aided and abetted by...
Alright, yes. Welcome everybody to my live stream. I'm going to be doing some commission work for a customer. Customer, yeah. Technically, yeah, they're a customer. I'm 3D printing some molds. And then once this is saved, I am going to be playing Card Shop Simulator since Space Marine 2 still doesn't work for my computer. Basically, in order to run it, I'll have to buy a brand new computer. And they won't do a refund because it says I'm over 2 hours, but it hasn't even got past the loading screen. So, yay! Let's see, docs. There's chat. Yep, hey y'all. Chat's open. This is open. Alright, now let's get to it.
By other disaffected elements of the population, attacked vital strategic locations. Within hours, Kazan was in turmoil as battles between loyal imperial forces and the cultists and their allies erupted everywhere. To compound the problem for the defenders, reports soon started coming in that units of darkly armoured Chaos Space Marines from the Night Lord's Traitor Legion were involved in the fighting. By the end of the first day's confused fighting, over half of Kazan's major population centres were controlled by the rebels. Most vital of these was the planet's capital, the ancient imperial city of Vogan. The battle for control of the city was to last for the duration of the uprising, and matched in intensity and ferociousness any city fight in recent imperial history. Planetary details. Kazan is an A-class agri-world, located approximately 75 light-years to the galactic south of the important imperial planet of Cadia. The Cadian sector stands upon the edge of the Eye of Terror, within a narrow corridor of stable space called the Cadian Gate. This forms the one and only predictable passage between the chaos-infested demon worlds of the Eye of Terror and Earth. Although Kazan lies well over 100 light-years from the Eye of Terror, its loss would be a terrible blow to Imperial defences. Kazan is a stable planet, little troubled by subterranean activity, while its twin moons are so small and distant as to have very little effect on the planet's surface. It is the most important producer of foodstuffs in the Cadian sector, and Kazan kelp cakes form over half of the dietary requirements of the human populations on planets within 100 light-years. The nutritious seaweed, which is used to produce Kazan's main export, is collected and processed by huge, mile-long harvesting ships which constantly crisscross the shallow oceans that make up 98.3% of the planet's surface. Kazan is home to some 4 million Imperial citizens, most of whom work on the harvesting ships and in the towns and ports that service them. All of the planet's population centres are located on the landmass located in Kazan's northern pole, which forms the planet's only solid land above sea level. The population hugs the coast of this continent, leaving the heavily forested interior untouched apart from the small settlements and outposts scattered along the roads and trails which link the coastal population centres. The fleet of harvesting ships are owned and run by a number of small family cartels, each of which is based in a different port. There is great rivalry between the different cartels, and open warfare between them over the right to harvest a particular lush kelp bed is not unknown. The only neutral ground where members of the different cartels are willing to mix without outright war breaking out is in the city of Vogan. Vogan is Kazan's capital, and from here, the planet's imperial governor rules in the name of the Imperium. It is the only city on Kazan that has a spaceport, Because of this, all of the cartels must bring their goods to Vogan in order to have them exported. And for most of Karzan's history, this has allowed the planet's governor to keep the unruly family business empires in line with imperial policy. The Karzan Uprising. The tragedy of the Karzan Uprising was that it could have been easily avoided. It came about through the greed and misjudgment of one man, Imperial Governor Heracon Cadalus. As already noted, all goods exported from Karzan had to leave from Vogan's single spaceport. Since the founding of the planet, a tax had been levied on the goods exported, technically to pay for the support and upkeep of the spaceport and planetary defense force. It had been long accepted that some of these taxes found their way into the pockets of the staff and officials of the planetary government. Governor Cadalus, however, was a vain and greedy man, and he deemed a bigger and bigger share of the money raised from the charges levied on the cartels for using the spaceport. This had a twofold effect. It led to cutbacks in the planet's defences in order to pay for Cadalus's excesses, and it led to growing discontent amongst the planet's population as the cartels began passing on their increased costs to their workforce. Within a decade of Cadalus being appointed governor, the situation was ripe for disaster. All that was required was a spark to set it off. The spark came in the form of Van Goyen, a petty thief and conman who was wanted in over a dozen imperial systems for impersonating officials of the ecclesiarchy and convincing gullible citizens to donate their savings to him for the betterment of the imperial cult. Until he arrived on Karzan, Von Goyen had simply used his ill-gotten gains to finance an extravagant and luxurious lifestyle. At some point, however, he clearly came into contact with agents of the Chaos Gods, who found in him a very useful servant. When Von Goyen arrived on Karzan, he immediately set about founding covens dedicated to the gods of chaos. His honeyed words and promises of wealth and freedom from imperial oppression falling on the fertile ground tilled by Cadalus's corruption and greed. Very quickly, Von Goyen was able to build up a network of covens dedicated to overthrowing the government of the planet. Once they were strong enough in numbers, Von Goyen's followers began arming themselves and preparing for war. Word was sent by nefarious means to the Night Lord's traitor legion, who dispatched their hardened warriors to aid Goyen. On the 12th day of Karzan's 5th bilunar cycle, just over a decade after Von Goyen had arrived on the planet, the rebels struck. The rebel forces. The rebel forces that took part in Karzan's uprising ranged from bands of untrained cultists armed with homemade weapons through to battle-hardened Chaos Space Marines of the Night Lord's Traitor Legion, and just about everything in between. As well as human warriors, the rebels were aided by demonic creatures summoned to the battlefield from the war. However, the actual number of such summonings was very small indeed. The exact reason for this is unclear, but it would appear that Vogan's great distance from the Eye of Terror and the lack of real devotion to any of the Chaos cults shown by Von Goyen's followers and the Night Lord's Space Marines may have been contributory factors. Whatever the reason, it was human warriors rather than supernatural monsters which did most of the fighting during the Karzan uprising. The bulk of Van Goyen's army was made up of cultists. Although they lacked heavy equipment in the form of armoured vehicles or heavy artillery, many of the cultists were well armed with lasguns and heavy weapons such as missile launchers and heavy bolters, which had been stolen from the planetary defence force or smuggled onto the planet. At the start of the uprising, the cultists had little training or experience, but this was quickly learned over the course of the campaign, and by the end of the fighting, the best cultish units were equal to any of the Cadian Imperial Guard units that they fought. The cultists were backed up by a large number of trained military units from the Karzan Planetary Defense Force, or the KZPDF. About a third of the KZPDF went over to the rebels, providing Von Goyen with a cadre of well-trained and equipped personnel, which proved invaluable. Rebel KZPDF armour and artillery were particularly useful, especially in the early stages of the uprising, where they were used to crush Imperial strongpoints and bastions. Later in the campaign, the arrival of Imperial Navy fighters and orbiting spacecraft made it increasingly difficult for Rebel armour and artillery to operate successfully, but even under these conditions they proved a constant thorn in the side of the Imperial forces. However, Probably the most important result of the disloyalty of so many KZ-PDF units was that the Imperial Guard and Space Marine forces drafted in to suppress the rebellion did not trust or respect the ones that had remained loyal. In many cases, this distrust was completely unjustified, but nonetheless it led to a number of situations where attacks were aborted or held up because Imperial commanders did not trust loyal KZ-PDF, which were fighting alongside them. The least numerous but most dangerous element in the rebel army was the units from the Night Lord's Chaos Space Marine Legion. The Night Lords do not appear to worship any one of the Chaos Gods and, following the Horus heresy, have instead become cynical, hard-bitten, and frighteningly ruthless warriors. They fight for the pleasure of it, and for the material rewards it can bring, and not because they worship some deity. Over the millennia, the Night Lords have seeded many uninhabited planets close to the Cadian Gate with their forces in order to take advantage of such an opportunity as the Karzan Uprising. Even though the Night Lords must have known it was unlikely that Karzan would fall to Von Goyen's forces, they dispatched a small number of Night Lord Chaos Space Marines to take part in the fighting. It seems clear now that their aim was to draw as many Imperial units as possible from elsewhere in the sector into the battle, in the hope that the disruption caused by the uprising would provide them with rich pickings from the neglected worlds. Although it is unlikely that more than 100 Night Lord Chaos Space Marines took part in the uprising, the effect of their presence was out of all proportion to their numbers. Panic spread like wildfire when word that Chaos Space Marines were on the planet, and the presence of just a squad of these fearsome warriors was enough to break the will of all but the bravest defenders. Later in the campaign, squads of Night Lords were used to bolster the defences of the most vital strongpoints and to lead sudden counterattacks to capture lost ground. It was only with the arrival of the 5th and 9th Imperial Fist Space Marine companies that the Imperial forces were able to deal adequately with the Night Lord units that were fighting on the planet. The Imperial Forces. The Imperial forces on Karzan can be split into 3 distinct groups: the Loyal Planetary Defense Force, Cadian Imperial Guard units, and Space Marines from the Imperial Fist Space Marine chapter. The troops that made up the KZ-PDF were of very mixed quality. Almost a third joined the rebels at the start of the campaign, and many of those that remained were of dubious quality. Endemic corruption affected many units, and Governor Catulus's policy of awarding positions in the PDF to his cronies and sycophants meant that combat efficiency suffered. There were very notable exceptions, however. In particular, the troops of the elite Karzan Commando and the Karzan Mountain Ranger regiments fought extremely valiantly, but these were the exception rather than the rule, and the bulk of the hard fighting to quell the Karzan uprising was performed by the Imperial Guard and Space Marines fighting on the planet. Almost all of the Imperial Guard units that fought on Karzan were from Cadia, and it was they who bore the brunt of the fighting in the campaign. The 122nd Cadian Regiment was already stationed on the planet at the start of the campaign and offered the only really serious opposition to the rebels in the early hours and days of the uprising. Later, the 9th and 72nd Cadian Infantry Regiments were transported to the planet, along with elements of the 3rd Cadian Heavy Tank Regiment, whose Bane Blades and Shadow Swords proved invaluable in reducing the rebel strongholds in the Dragonspine Mountains to rubble. The Cadians were well equipped and trained, and had been honed by years of fighting against Chaos raids near the Cadian Gate. Nevertheless, the ferocity of the fighting matched anything in Cadian military history, and by the end of the campaign, almost a third of the Cadian troops involved had been killed or wounded. Towards the end of the uprising, the loyal KZ-PDF and Imperial Guard regiments were reinforced by the 5th and 9th companies of the Imperial Fist Space Marine chapter. The Imperial Fists, a first founding chapter, have been famed for their skill at siege warfare ever since the days of the Emperor's Great Crusade. Their expertise at city fighting was put to good use in the desperate battle for the Palace of Peace, which marked the closing stages of the Battle of Vogan. The capture of Vogan. The battle for Vogan began as it was to end, in blood, death, and confusion. The rebels' presence on Karzan and their preparation for war had not gone completely unnoticed by the planet's defense forces. However, the huge scale of the rebellion and the extent of their preparations came as a terrible shock. The rebels had chosen their time for the beginning of their uprising very carefully. It was the date of Imperial Governor Cadalus' birthday and had been proclaimed a public holiday. Over half of the Planetary Defence Force had been given leave so they could join the celebrations. Those PDF units that were on duty were mainly von Goyen's followers who had volunteered to serve that day. The rebels possessed detailed information about Vogan. They had divided the city into 4 attack zones and had pinpointed nearly every military installation. Units were assigned to each location and given orders to capture it, no matter the cost in lives. Cult leaders had prepared a detailed list of over 200 targets and had listed individual Imperial officials to be captured or killed. Inside the city, Colonel Karnow, commander of the 122nd Cadian Regiment, which was stationed on the planet, was worried. He felt that all the signs pointed to an imminent uprising. Cancelling all leave, he placed his units on alert and gathered his staff in the regiment's HQ compound, which was located in the city. He decided to leave the bulk of the regiment in their containments located outside Vogan, trusting to the KZPDF to be able to deal with any trouble that occurred inside the city. This proved to be a mistake, for when the attack came, the only other loyal troops located in the city were the Adeptus Arbites units based in their precinct house to the south of the city. When the uprising began, the Adeptus Arbites precinct house and the 122nd Regiment's HQ were to become the only 2 islands of resistance in the city. The attack started when mobs of cultists poured into the city streets. Those loyal citizens that did not join the rebellion were forced to hide in their houses or be killed by the mob, which had been whipped into a frenzy of hatred by the leaders of the cult's covens. All across Vogan, people that failed to escape were sacrificed upon makeshift altars dedicated to the dark gods of chaos. The streets ran with blood, and the air was rent by the gurgling screams of sacrificial victims. Walls were daubed with the marks of the chaos gods, and any icons of the imperial cult were desecrated or destroyed. Buildings were torched, the fires running unchecked and lighting the city with a dreadful, hellish glow. Monstrous creatures, drawn from the warp by these nightmare scenes, appeared and rampaged through the city, killing all that got in their way, rebel or loyalist alike. At the centre of Vogan lay the Imperial Governor's residence, a mighty citadel known as the Palace of Peace. When the uprising began, Governor Cadalus and his closest cronies were taking part in a debauched birthday celebration. Unknown to them, most of the palace guard had been infiltrated by cultists. Those guards that were still loyal were quickly and quietly dispatched. The revelers did not even know that anything was untoward until von Goyen himself strode into the banqueting hall. Snapping his fingers, he ordered the guards to hurl Cadalus and his followers in the palace's dungeons, where he would deal with them at his leisure. The strongest bastion in the city of Vogan had fallen without a shot being fired. Meanwhile, a sea of cultists were attacking the Adeptus Arbites precinct house and the 122nd Regiment's HQ. Again and again, the cultists hurled themselves against these objectives, but both positions were heavily fortified and surrounded by razor wire and minefields, and it proved impossible for the lightly armed cultists to take them. Even the blood-crazed leaders of the cultist mob soon realized that further attacks were futile, so they changed tactics and tried to subdue the defenders with heavy weapons and sniper fire from overlooking buildings. Surrounded and cut off, unaware that rebel attacks were happening across the entire planet, the Arbites and guard garrisons could do little other than hold out and pray to the Emperor for help. All around these compounds, rebel units from the KZPDF and their cultist comrades controlled the city. While the PDF troops began fortifying their positions and preparing defences, the cultists carried on hunting down any loyal Imperial citizens trapped in the city. Above the Palace of Peace, a huge banner was unfurled, bearing the mark of Chaos Undivided. As if this were a signal, at the very moment the banner was unfurled, a Thunderhawk gunship belonging to the Night Lords roared down from orbit and landed in the palace courtyard, disgorging half a dozen squads of Chaos Space Marines to help secure the city. It had taken the rebels 2 hours to capture Vogan, the planet's capital and largest city. Holding out. Although von Goyen and his followers did not know it, this was to mark the high point of the uprising. All over Karzane, the cultists had been successful and the Imperial defenders had been caught unprepared. But now the defenders knew what they were up against and, more importantly, they knew who their enemy was. Although hundreds of thousands had joined the Chaos Covens and a third of the KZPDF had joined the rebellion, the majority of the population remained loyal to the Imperium, and they now started fighting back. Within days, the outnumbered rebels were forced back on the defensive. The poorly armed and poorly trained cultists suffered especially badly on those early days, with thousands dying in futile wave attacks on Imperial strongpoints. The monsters that had appeared to aid the rebels in the first day's fighting were either slain in these battles or returned to the shadowy realm from whence they came, leaving the rebels to fight on unaided. Finally, von Goyen realized that these attacks did little other than to deplete the ranks of his followers and called them off. But by then, 2 in every 3 of the cultists were already dead. The KZPDF and Night Lords fared better, but they were stretched very thin. The arrival of fresh Cadian troops just 3 weeks after the rebellion began sealed the fate of the rebels and meant it was only a matter of time before the rebellion was crushed. Within Vogan, the 122nd Regiment HQ and Adeptus Arbites compounds proved to be 2 terrible thorns in the side of the rebels. Both lay within the city walls and allowed Imperial reinforcements to get within the city without having to fight their way in. Instead of having a secure and heavily fortified position, the rebels had to defend against multiple threats from within what they thought would be their defensive perimeter. In the early days of the rebellion, von Goyen launched several furious assaults against each stronghold, but even with the aid of the rebel artillery to pound the defenders, and with the demons and Night Lords Chaos Space Marines to spearhead the assault, it proved impossible for the rebels to fully capture the compounds. Outnumbered and outgunned, the defenders gritted their teeth and held on as best they could, selling their lives as dearly as possible and making the rebels pay in blood for every yard of ground they took. By the end of the first day, there were only a half-dozen men in the 122nd Regiment HQ who were unwounded, and the situation was little better in the Arbites precinct house. It seemed impossible that the 2 positions would not fall, but wounded and unwounded men alike kept on fighting furiously. This desperate defense, through that terrible night as shells exploded on the compound and monsters howled in the darkness, brought just enough time for a relief column to fight its way the 12 kilometers from the regiment's main camp to the 2 compounds. When the rebels attacked again at dawn on the second day, they were met by fresh Imperial Guard troops and were driven back with heavy losses. Half-hearted rebel attacks continued for the rest of the day, but none made any headway. Reluctantly, von Goyen was forced to yield the initiative, dig in and await the Imperial counterattack. The Reconquest. Starting with the 3rd day of the Battle of Vogan, troops from the 122nd Regiment, eventually reinforced by troops from 2 other Cadian regiments and the Imperial 5th Space Marine chapter, began the building-by-building reconquest of the city. Every alley, street corner, window and wall harboured potential death. The only way to advance was to blast an entrance in a wall with a grenade or plasma charge and then charge through the breach. Casualties amongst the assault troops were very high. Just to make such an assault once called for great courage, but the guardsmen of the 122nd Regiment were called upon to do so again and again, day after day, week after week. Very few survived such fighting unscathed, either in body or mind. The terrain in Vogan aided the defenders and denied the attackers advantages in terms of mobility and heavy support. The rebels quickly learned that their best tactic was to stay as close to the attackers as possible, making it impossible for Imperial artillery or air support to be used without risk of hitting friendly troops. The fighting became a deadly close-quarters fight, with quarter neither asked nor given. The rebels, aided by local cultists and captured slave labour, turned each building into a fortress. Heavy weapons were carefully positioned to cover streets and alleyways. The city's sewers were used to allow squads to move quickly to the threatened locations, or to make a sudden and unexpected counterattack. The attackers countered such threats by sending their own troops down into the sewers, so that fierce battles were fought between the sewer rats of both sides in the darkened tunnels that lay below Vogan's streets. On the surface, Lehman Russ battle tanks were used to support squads as they assaulted a building. The tank would advance along the street, blasting any rebel heavy weapons that they could see. The infantry assault team would work their way from building to building, methodically reducing each rebel position and clawing the city back. From high vantage points, snipers from both sides fired down into the streets below. Deadly, man-to-man sniper duels were not uncommon. Whilst the Cadians battled in the south of the city, loyal KZ PDF units were operating to the north, using the Adeptus Arbites precinct house as their jumping-off point. Troops from the 2nd and 6th KZ PDF regiments began to clear the north wall of the city. After 4 days of hard fighting, the 6th Regiment was able to capture the North Road Gate, making it possible for loyal KZ PDF units to start entering the city. Facing opposition every bit as determined as that faced by the Cadians, the KZ PDF regiments continued their advance. Slowly, the Cadians and loyal Kazan troops began pulling the noose tight on the rebels. After 3 weeks of continuous fighting, the rebels had been driven back into their final strongholds in and around the Palace of Peace. But although Imperial troops had recaptured over 3/4 of the city, the rebels were by no means beaten. They still held strong positions and were perfectly capable of launching bold counterattacks. The Night Lord's Chaos Space Marines were still a potent threat, leading counterattacks and carrying out raids behind Imperial lines. What was more, the attackers had been bled dry in the fierce fighting and were all but exhausted. For nearly another month, the fighting in Vogan became locked into a grinding war of attrition, with neither side able to break the deadlock. The final assault. But although the rebels had weathered the storm of the first Imperial assault on the city, the result, in the long run, was not in doubt. Soon, fresh Imperial troops joined the battered troops already in the city. Most important of these were 2 full companies of Imperial Fist Space Marines. The presence of these champions of the Imperium, renowned throughout the galaxy as one of the great first founding chapters, did much to restore the spirit of the troops that had been fighting for 7 weeks in the ruined city streets of Vogan. Within days of their arrival, the final assault on Von Goyen's stronghold in the Palace of Peace began. The Imperial Fists were famous for their skill at siege warfare, but nonetheless, the difficulty of the assault on the Palace of Peace matched anything in their history. Imperial tanks could not operate in the narrow streets and alleyways that made up the palace grounds. The palace walls were thick and heavily fortified, and making a breach was often difficult, if not impossible. The fighting degenerated into a series of headlong assaults, with attackers having to fight their way forward across the bodies of their fallen comrades. Yet the relentless advance continued, and slowly the rebels were driven back. Finally, after almost 3 months of heavy fighting, only a few dozen rebels were left alive. By order of the High Command, the surviving members of Vogan's Adeptus Arbites were allowed to lead the final assault. The Arbites charged forward, roaring their litanies of justice, served as they advanced, some carrying scaling ladders to get over the walls and into the last stronghold. The rebels fought hard, but were horribly overmatched and died to a man. Von Goyen's body was found in the palace dungeon, not far from the hideously tortured body of former Governor Cadalus. Von Goyen had taken poison rather than being captured. Meanwhile, far above the dungeons, the troops of the Adeptus Arbites hurled down the last Chaos banner that had flown over the Palace of Peace for the duration of the rebellion. The Kazan uprising was over.
I wish people would.
Thanks for watching, everybody. I really love this Siege of Vogan thing. I remember it quite vividly from when I was a kid. It was great. I even bought this book. I never even once played a City Fight game, but this was like the lore in the City Fight sort of supplement, the first one they ever did, and it's quality. I don't know what it is, it just really got me. Maybe I was watching World at War at the time with Stalingrad and stuff, so it really played into that. But yeah, quality stuff. Anyway, if you'd like to support the channel, please consider using the links below. Otherwise, I will see you again next time. And thanks to everybody who is supporting the channel. Really appreciate that. And do remember to give the video a like. That's great. Alright, thanks very much. Bye.
Yeah, this YouTube channel, like, it's nice to listen to. You guys go check them out, you know?
To the inquisitorial representative, Senatorum Imperialis.
There we go.
Report on contemporary power formations within the Inquisition. As requested by you, our representative to the High Lords, I have compiled this brief summary of the current politics and power formations within our great organization. More detailed information is available on request. As has been the case within our orders since effective records began, certain philosophies and interpretations of our divine task have held sway over the agents of our noble establishment. The popularity of different viewpoints and beliefs waxes and wanes with the passing of the decades, and so it is imperative that regular information regarding these political structures within the Inquisition is available, and the level with which they interfere with the actions of our agents and the achievements of our goals. None of us wish a repeat of the Denorian heresies or the Seastris schism, and we all endeavour to avoid a return to the methods seen during the anti-crusade of Apolloch and the Valorin pogrom. As you know, the interpretation of the divine will of the Emperor is always fraught with diversion, and that our agents, whilst wholly dedicated to their task as they see it, are no less prone to personal definitions of the Emperor's purpose, our manifest duty, and the manner in which it can or should be executed. As is the way of mankind, similarly minded individuals will gather together on occasion, sharing a commonality of their beliefs. It is impossible to tell accurately how many of these informal organizations, which I shall hereafter refer to as factions, can be found within the orders of the Emperor's Holy Inquisition, but I have managed to isolate a few that currently hold much favour amongst our agents and can be said to hold some degree of political leverage within the organisation. As you will see, the disparity between the beliefs of some factions is at such an extent that they can be said to be fundamentally opposed to each other. As no one is above or below the ever-watchful eye of the Inquisition, it is not an unheard of occurrence for inquisitors of different factions to investigate one another and declare each other excommunicate traitoris.
What is that noise? Oh, it's in my head.
Whilst we of the upper hierarchy must endeavour to remain impartial in this, to provide clear and consistent guidance and avoid becoming embroiled in these internecine affairs, on occasion it is necessary for us to intervene. Alaska's Purge is perhaps the most recent documented example of this. Such differences of opinion are so deeply held by some of our operatives that it not only leads to internal moral conflict, but physical conflict as well. The necessary secrecy with which the Inquisition works makes this all but impossible to predict or forestall, and we must stand ever ready to respond to minimize the effects and aftermath of these serious matters. However, we cannot in all faith dictate to or indoctrinate our agents in this respect, for it is this very individuality, strength of mind and belief, and sense of personal responsibility, which enables them to perform the dire tasks we ask of them. The Inquisition does not need unfeeling machines, it needs reasoning men who have courage to enforce their convictions. In the summary below, I have divided the factions concerned into two broad camps. There are those traditionally dubbed Puritans, and the factions that are referred to in previous reports as Radicals. Puritans uphold the letter of the law and the dictates of the Emperor to the letter, as enforced upon the populace and servants of the Emperor at large where possible. It is they who uphold widespread beliefs that permeate the organizations of the Imperium and can be said to adhere to the traditional values as preached by the Ministorum and enshrined at the heart of imperial law. Radicals, in their favoured position as inquisitors, feel they are free to enforce the spirit and intent of the Emperor's judgments, and it can be truly said that they see the methods they employ to be secondary to the execution of their duties and the achievement of their goals. They would be considered heretics by the vast majority of imperial citizens for their behaviour, but we, as more knowledgeable and wiser observers, can see there are powerful arguments to support their views and methodology. In either case, extremism of one type or another must always be closely witnessed, lest it turn to self-destructive obsession. Puritan factions. Thorians. The Thorians trace their origins to the age of apostasy and the overthrow of Lord Vander by Sebastian Thor. To some inquisitors, it was evident that Thor moved with a divine purpose and was instilled with some of the power and charisma of the Emperor himself. It is their belief that the Emperor walks amongst us, having been shorn from the physical realm by the wounds inflicted by Horus. He once again must choose vessels to do his work, as he did so before the Age of Strife. The flesh maintained in the Golden Throne is not the Emperor, for he travels abroad, tending to his divine will, instilling his power into those who have been chosen. But these are frail, mortal bodies which can possess only a fraction of the Emperor's power, and are ultimately destined to die of injury or old age. But what if the Emperor could be granted a body that does not wither and die? That could be his vessel for all eternity to come. The Thorians believe that such a thing is possible, that the Emperor yet awaits for his new body to be found or created. In essence, a new Emperor will be created to lead mankind to its destiny and conquest of the galaxy. The Thorians seek ways that energy and consciousness interact with the warp, and their transferal from one to the other. They delve into the secrets of possession and manifestation by demons and other warp entities, trying to decipher what rules govern the relationship between the warp and the material universe. It is their dream that one day they shall find a host suitable for the Emperor's magnificence, and through prayers and ritual be able to guide his spirit into his new body, allowing the Emperor to once again walk amongst his people. The Thorians can mostly be found amongst the ranks of the Order Malleus, where they can study the power of warp-based creatures in the material realm, gleaning understanding about the Emperor's abilities to manifest his divine will in our universe. A fair number can be found inside the Ordo Hereticus, where the course of their duties allows them to find out as much as possible concerning Sebastian Thor and other such gifted saints in the Ministorum's long history. There are quite a number of resurrectionist cults and factions within the ecclesiarchy, and these create a very useful network and provide foot soldiers for Thorian inquisitors. Relatively few are found in the Order Xenos, though there are some who believe the answer to achieving the Thorians' aims can be found in the sophisticated psychic technology utilized by the Eldar and other ancient races. The Thorians' opponents claim that even if it were possible to resurrect the Emperor into a new mortal body, it would cause a schism across the Imperium, more dangerous than any heresy or civil war that has gone before. Believers in the resurrection and unbelievers would violently clash, and a large part of the Imperium would be destroyed in a massive war of faith. Even if this does not happen, nobody knows what changes the Emperor's power underwent upon his ascension, and whether he would lose them were he once more confined to a physical shell. Most importantly, how would the Astronomicon work were the Emperor able to move around freely once more? It is the risk to these very foundations of the Imperium that opponents to the Thorians find the most worrying, and many believe that they are risks not worth taking. The Thorians claim that to take mankind onto the next phase of evolution, the Emperor must be able to lead his people, both physically and spiritually. Mono-dominance. It was Inquisitor Galdo in the 3rd century of the 33rd millennium who penned the treatise Mono-dominance, the right of man to rule the galaxy in the Emperor's holy name. In this lengthy document, he compiled his many experiences and commentaries from nearly 400 years of service to the Imperium. His final conclusion amounted to declaring that the only way the Emperor's loyal servants would survive in the galaxy was if everything else was destroyed. At the time, this overly pessimistic view found few sympathizers and was attributed to a devout but aging Inquisitor suffering a breakdown and losing his faith in humanity's ability to prevail. However, several centuries later, Inquisitor Germanius of Pelusia revived the theme of mono-dominance and swore to enact Galdo's vision, and it has enjoyed various levels of popularity amongst Inquisitors ever since. The mono-dominants have a simple goal: to destroy forever the Emperor's enemies. Mono-dominants have absolutely no tolerance for any kind of wayward behaviour. There is no excuse for heresy, contemplating heresy, or for abetting heretics. Heresy includes mutation, religious deviation, aliens, psychers, and any other beings who do not conform to their view of loyal imperial servants. There is only one punishment for heresy in the mono-dominant philosophy: death. Mankind is fighting a war for racial survival, and the mono-dominants hope that if they kill off enough aliens, psychers, mutants, and heretics, eventually natural selection will prevail and humanity will rise to its position of ultimate power. Mono-dominants are very militant, and will resort to the final solution of exterminators more than any other Inquisitors. They are an open faction, using their presence to stir widespread xenophobia and hatred, leading mobs of frenzied citizenry to purge their own ranks of the filthy and unclean heretics who threaten their future. They are utterly ruthless and unforgiving, inflexible and intolerant. They are generally the youngest and most hot-headed of the Inquisition, charging across the Imperium, leaving devastation in their wake. Their confidence in their philosophy is almost unshakable, and they, more than any other faction, will wage war upon Inquisitors with a slightly less hardline view if their paths cross. In their minds, quite rightly, being a member of the Inquisition is no excuse for heresy. Mono-dominance can be found in all orders of the Inquisition, and quite often they belong to none of the orders, seeing all heresy as equally threatening. Inquisitors who believe in the mono-dominant philosophy are wont to associate with the most militant and violent cults and creeds within the Imperium, such as the Redemptionists, and can most readily draw upon the resources of the Ministorum to achieve their aims. Of course, many Inquisitors find the mono-dominants incredibly narrow-minded and rigid, and claim that often they do more harm than good with their excessive purges. Inquisitors who believe in the incorporation of alien technology and warp artifacts and other supposedly heretical notions consider the mono-dominants to be crippling themselves by their refusal to make use of such tools. Amolethians. The start of the 41st millennium was a time of spiritual and physical rebuilding for the Imperium, a great conclave was held at Gathalamor at Mount Amalath, where military, religious, and political leaders and dignitaries gathered in their thousands to swear once more their oaths of loyalty to the Emperor and mankind. It was this gathering that spurred Macarius to his conquest of nearly 1,000 worlds, and during this time there was a swell of optimism within the Inquisition that everything was once more proceeding as the Emperor had planned, in contrast to the widespread pessimism that pervaded before and after the Reign of Blood and the Plague of Unbelief. A large number of Inquisitors joined the Amalethian movement, believing that it was their sacred duty to let nothing threaten the strength which the Imperium was regaining. They strive to maintain the status quo, seeking out any person or agency that might destabilize the power of the Imperium from without and within. They are less concerned with the more traditional crimes of mutation, witchery, and religious heresy, except where these conflict with the institutions of the Empire of Man. They try to keep the rivalry and politicking between the various imperial organizations to a minimum, holding to the Inquisition's original creed of strength through unity. Change is considered the most serious threat of all, for change can herald disaster. While other Inquisitors may endeavour to bring about some great upheaval or revelation that will see mankind break from its current turmoil into a new golden age, the Amaltherians prefer to progress slowly, if progress is necessary at all. The Amalethians accuse Inquisitors of other philosophies of utter arrogance in claiming that they know the divine will of the Emperor. Amalethians trust the Emperor to work his way and his plan, as he has always done, and it is for the Inquisition to maintain the Imperium so that he may do as he sees fit. Mortals do not try to guess the Emperor's mind. At its heart, the Imperium is the Emperor embodied, and to protect the Imperium is to protect the Emperor. Amalethians work hard to root out factions and cults which would destabilize and threaten the power of imperial organizations, imperial commanders, military leaders, and so forth. They openly and actively support these parties and grant them tremendous leeway to protect their own positions, where it does not threaten the status or power of other organizations and individuals. They are very wary of any change at all, and closely adhere to the dominant beliefs of their time and society. The Amalethian faction can be found in all of the Inquisition orders, each striving to shield the Imperium from the worst ravages of aliens, cults, religious schisms, and mutation. They work well with agents from other Imperial agencies, as the interests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, Imperial Commanders, Ministerium, and other organizations are also the interests of the Inquisition. They work particularly well with the Adeptus Arbites and local security forces, whose duty is to enforce imperial and local law, thus defending the power of the Imperium itself. Radicals. Xenthites. Xenthism is one of the eldest philosophies of the Inquisition, named after Inquisitor Master Zaranchek Xenthus, who was executed as a heretic in the early 32nd millennium. Xanthus was accused of chaos worship, and although he professed his innocence strongly, he was eventually burnt by a team of fellow Inquisitors. Throughout, Xanthus had maintained that he remained pure, though he admitted that he did on occasion utilize the forces of the warp and chaos to achieve his goals. It was his firm stance that such power could be harnessed without the spiritual corruption of the wielder that was to be later picked up upon by other Inquisitors. It is the ultimate goal of the Xanthites to harness the power of chaos for mankind. They believe that chaos cannot be defeated, for it is merely a reflection of humanity itself. However, those energies and powers created by its existence can be turned back for the benefit of humanity, rather than being an enemy. This does not mean that they advocate giving in to chaos, but rather to capture the essence of chaos and turn it to useful rather than destructive purposes. In the same way as the warp, and so chaos, allows warp travel, astro-telepathic, and psychers to work on mankind's behalf, so too can other facets of chaos be controlled, tamed to the Emperor's will by the Xanthites. Xanthites investigate all aspects of the warp and chaos, investing its power into themselves where possible, destroying it only when necessary. They will use chaos-tainted artifacts, demon weapons, books of chaos lore, and other heretical items, utilizing the powers and abilities of these weapons and tools to combat the incursions of chaos, heretics, and aliens. Within the Xanthites, there are those whose beliefs go even further, and are known as Herosians. The Herosians look to the Primarch Horus, who was a mighty being, invested with immense chaos power, and see an opportunity wasted. They believe that a new Horus could be created, invested with great energy from the warp, but one who would unite all of mankind for its betterment, rather than enslavement to chaos. Most other Inquisitors consider the Xanthites, and particularly the Herosians, to be walking along the edge of a precipice. Xanthites are commonly seen amongst the Inquisition as arrogant and dangerous, toying with powers they do not fully comprehend. Puritanical Inquisitors have a particular loathing for the Herosians, who they see as the most dire heretics, with their own belief that they can create a new emperor. However, as one of the oldest philosophies of the Inquisition, and included among their number some of the most learned and powerful inquisitors, it is a brave or rash inquisitor who will stand alone against the Xanthites. Most often, as was the case with Xanthus himself, a cell of inquisitors will form a common cause against a particular Xanthite, in an effort to expose his perceived heresies and to deal justice. Their dealings with the demons of the warp lead many Xanthites and Herosians to become members of the Ordo Melius, and they quite frequently build up associations with chaos cults. They have been known to create sects of their own, which are concerned with unraveling ancient mysteries and delving into arcane lore and knowledge. Recongregators. According to the recongregation philosophy, the Imperium has become corrupt and decaying. It no longer serves the purpose for which it exists, and works in spite of its massive organizations rather than because of them. Over time, the morass of politics, factions, bureaucracy, and the immense edifices of the Imperium must be pulled apart and reassembled in a new fashion which works better for mankind. If the Imperium is allowed to continue to stagnate, it will eventually fall apart, and humanity will fall prey to the unnumbered perils that it faces. Recongregators attempt to destabilize the Imperial organizations from the inside, replacing the corrupt and/or conservative leaders and men of power with people who have more radical views and a will to change. Most are weary of too much upheaval, though, preferring not to destroy something utterly, but to subtly change it and shape it to their will. Too much direct action risks bringing about the premature downfall of the Imperium and the commensurate disaster that will bring. As might be expected, recongregators are mostly found within the Ordo Hereticus, where they can learn of individuals who may be useful to their plans. Recongregators often help anti-imperial sects and covens, often altering the cult's philosophies to match their own if possible. They are not above extreme action when necessary, if this will promote the required response and change they desire. As can be imagined, recongregators have frequent run-ins with those who believe in the Amalithian philosophy, as the two beliefs are diametrically opposed. This can lead to conflict between inquisitors of the two concepts, with one working to destabilize or overthrow a particular person's or organization's power, and the other striving to maintain it. Istvanians. The greatest conflict to engulf humanity was the Great Heresy, which began with the Primarch Horus virus-bombing Istvan free. Although the Horus Heresy saw the destruction of entire worlds and devastation on an unprecedented and unrepeated scale, there are some Inquisitors who see it as one of the moments during which the Imperium and mankind's future was forged. From the Horus Heresy came the great military changes that saw the breakup of the Space Marine legions and the division of Navy and Guard, and the Emperor's ascension and the creation of the Ministorum and many other events which shaped the Imperium of the present. It is the goal of the Istvanians to strengthen humanity through adversity, believing that humanity is at its greatest and strongest in times of turmoil and conflict. From periods of greatest upheaval have come the greatest leaps forward in technology, faith, and galactic dominance. Did not Horus Heresy weed out those Marines disloyal to the Emperor? Did not the age of apostasy herald the coming of Sebastian Thor and the reformation of the Ecclesiarchy? Did not the great battles fought by Macarius' armies shine like a great torch in the dark times of the early 41st millennium? These are the arguments they put forward. The Istvanians claim that only when it is hardest tested does mankind show the true strength that lies within. To this end, the Istvanians endeavour to propagate strife and conflict for mankind's greatest future. Istvanians fan the fires of war and hatred so that mankind will stay vigilant, that its warriors will be skilled and ready, so none will believe that they have done all they can. They are a bombastic and obvious creed, flaunting their warmongering ways, instilling those nearby with fiery zeal to fight for themselves and the rest of mankind. They pit faction against faction, world against world.
I'm listening to a channel called A Border Prince. They just do audiobooks of Warhammer. I listened to that. Just got done doing some 3D slicing. Ran into some issues with that, so I sent a message to the customer. And now it's time to do some card shop simulator. Yay!
So that the survivors will be stronger for it. Istvanians will stir up trouble wherever they go, working on the phobias and prejudices of imperial commanders, military officers, and the general populace to breed superstition, suspicion, and violence. They work well with destabilization and terrorist cults, and foster relationships with violent pro-imperial cults. Quite often, they will build up the power of these secret societies and sects, only to reveal the threat that they pose to the authorities, urging the faithful to bring torch and sword to purge the corruption within. Istvanians are found in all ordos of the Inquisition, each extolling the terrors and dangers posed by the forces they face. Other members of the Inquisition do not trust Isvanians, always questioning their motives and agendas. Opposing Inquisitors urge that, rather than strengthening mankind, the Isvanians' destructive activities weaken and destabilize the Imperium, threatening the bastion on which mankind's survival is based. All too often, an Inquisitor may be investigating a heretical cult or individual who is bent on opposing or destroying the Imperium, only to find they are sponsored or led by an Isvanian who has fostered such rebellion for their own ends. Many such encounters end in physical conflict, as Isvanians are nothing if not callous and...
When you put your heart and soul into creating something, you want it to make an impact, to endure, to express something.
Bloodthirsty. Primary conclusions. As you can imagine, tense situations and open conflict can occur when members of factions with opposing viewpoints meet, and the secretive nature in which our agents must operate makes all but sweeping judgments impossible. There have been occurrences in the past when outright war within the Inquisition itself has occurred, though these are thankfully rare and have always been hidden from the populace at large. As with all such philosophies, however, an idea can never truly be killed, hence the bitter extreme some Inquisitors will employ to eradicate what they, rightly or wrongly, perceive as heresy within our own ranks. In all, such dedication is to be encouraged, and diversity of thought and initiative has always been more valued in our organization than adherence to written creeds and rules. Careful manipulation of our agents and information regarding the factions is desired, and we should continue to observe rather than to dictate, as has always been our way in such matters. I remain, as ever, your most faithful servant and guardian. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you wouldn't mind giving this video a like and subscribe if you're not subscribed, and remember to hit the bell to get notifications. I'll be back with more soon. Thanks for watching. Cheers.
Thank you for joining the stream.
The official history of the Macarian Crusade. Macarius was one of the greatest war leaders the Imperium has ever known. A military genius of the highest caliber. A ruthless and ambitious commander whose dreams of conquest reshaped the Imperium at the beginning of the 41st millennium. After millennia of disorder, the Imperium was finally united in more than name. At the conclave of Gathalamor, held in the shadow of Mount Amalath, at the tomb of the Great Confessor, on the day of Ascension itself, over 800 masters of the Space Marine chapters gathered to re-swear their oaths of loyalty. The old power of the ecclesiarchy was waning, and with it the introspective and self-destructive habits of mind that had divided the Imperium over previous centuries. The schism of the apostasy was fading from memory, and few remained to champion a cause that seemed increasingly irrelevant. The hardcore of Bakurian dissenters had fled far and wide into the eastern fringe, away from the Imperium and the persecution of the ecclesiarchal confessors. Mars and the empire of the tech priests, for centuries divided from Earth by religious wars and intolerance on both sides, reforged its old alliance at the Treaty of Cirrus. In the past, the tech priests had found good reason to distrust the Adeptus, and had wisely remained aloof from the turmoil that had enveloped an unstable Imperium. Yet even the techno-magi could see that the Imperium had emerged stronger than ever. From the Forge Worlds poured armaments and ships to equip the Imperial armies and carry them to new worlds. Onto this stage strode Lord Commander Solar Macarius, and behind him marched the greatest armies of conquest the galaxy had ever seen. The growing anarchy of the previous centuries had left many old worlds abandoned by the Imperium. Some had fallen to orcs, others to enemies unknown, whilst hundreds had simply stopped paying tithes and had effectively slipped beyond control of the Adeptus. It was these worlds that had felt the first blow of the new armies of reconstruction. New Imperial Guard armies swept down upon the enemy without warning or mercy. Planets were laid bare, invaders destroyed, and human worlds swiftly brought under the Imperial yoke. Inquisitorial teams which followed in the wake of the conquering forces reported scenes of devastation and suffering worse than that caused by rampaging orcs. Missionaries from the Adeptus Ministorum set about restoring the faith amongst the survivors. But so appalling were the conditions left by the conquering armies that many millions died from hunger and disease. However, it was years before rumours of Macarius's uncompromising campaign reached the Adeptus of Earth. At first, all the Adeptus Terra had were reports of worlds newly liberated and alien hordes defeated, and of ancient human communities rediscovered and brought back into the light of the Emperor. Many fierce battles had been fought, and at each encounter the new Imperial Guard armies of reconstruction had performed brilliantly. Macarius's strategy of sudden and decisive attack was working better than could have been imagined. 100 worlds fell to him in 1 year, 300 the next, and in the third year of the campaign, nearly 700 planets were taken by the combined forces of the fleets of the Segmentum Solar and the Imperial Guard. It seemed that nothing could stop Macarius. Within 5 years, his armies reached the old borders of the Astronomicon. They found planets which had not seen an Adepta for over 5,000 years, where tales of the Emperor, of space marines, and the dark days of the Horus Heresy were treated as myths. They found worlds where humans had turned to the dark certainties of science and created many new and wondrous machines. There were worlds which welcomed Macarius with open arms, and others which resisted the forces of the Imperium in vain. The Adeptus Mechanicus long lamented the destruction of the Adrentis V, whose hyper-technology kept the Imperium at bay for 2 years before it was destroyed in the conflagration of a redirected comet. Of its secrets, nothing now remains. At the edge of the galaxy, Macarius's armies stood undefeated. But the long battles had taken their toll. The troops had suffered years of constant warfare and had travelled so far from home that communication and supply were no longer practical. It was as if they had left human space altogether. So dimly did the Emperor's light shine at the fringes of the Astronomicon. Even the ship's navigators could sense only darkness around them. Macarius pressed forward into the thin halo zone of old stars that surrounded the galaxy. These were ancient worlds where men had never heard of the Emperor. Their ancestors left Earth over 30,000 years ago at the dawn of human history. At this point, Macarius's generals wavered. They pleaded for him to reconsider. His men, tired and aging, hesitated. The halo was dark and forbidding. Navigation was slow without the guiding beacon of the Astronomicon. The astropaths were virtually beyond range of psychic communication. There was a sense of growing unrest among the armies and fleets. Macarius knew that the end was come. The armies had simply run out of energy at the moment of their greatest challenge. To make matters worse, some of the exploratory teams had failed to return from their missions, whilst others reported mysterious phenomena. The troops whispered that the old stars were haunted, that the worlds which orbited them were inhabited by ghosts, and that the Halo was not a place for living men.
Excuse me.
Macarius locked himself in the staterooms of the capital ship and drank himself into a stupor. His generals waited. They had shared in their commander's dreams. For years, his ambition had carried them across the depths of space and to the edge of the galaxy. But now, they would not go on. Could not go on. Drunkenly, Macarius accused his men of betraying him, and now he brooded in silence over his maps and charts, reports of new civilizations, and tales of greater mysteries that lay amongst the old stars. When he reappeared, it was to order the fleets back into the Imperium. His soldiers cheered their hero. His generals sighed with relief. But Macarius was a broken man. He had dreamed of boundless conquest and had awoken to find human fear and frailty. On the return journey, Macarius died. The apothecaries said it was a fever contracted in the jungle fighting on Juka. Those closer to him said he had died so that he could be with the heroes of old who never balked at danger or shunned the unknown. His troops wept openly at the news of their leader's death, for though they had refused to follow him into the void, they revered him almost as a god. Macarius' body was carried in stasis to the supply base he had created at the launch of the campaign decades before. Over the interim, the world had grown into a busy port, through which poured Adepta, ministers of the imperial cult, tech priests, and many others, all journeying to the new worlds that Macarius had unveiled. The base had been named Macaria by the captains of the fleet. Now, Lord Solar's body returned to Macaria and was interned in a great sepulchre that had been prepared for it. At his funeral march, 1 million men filed past his tomb, and 100 generals laid their swords upon his sarcophagus. It is said that the whole Imperium wept for the fallen commander, though it is doubtful if the population of some of the worlds he conquered ever felt so kindly towards him. In truth, he was a brutal conqueror and a ruthless soldier, though he was often generous towards his troops and even to conquered worlds whose defenders had impressed him in some way or other. He was certainly a charismatic man, and one for whom others proved willing to lay down their lives. No one has ever led the Imperial Guard to more victories or greater conquests, nor won so many worlds for the Imperium, nor taken armies beyond the edge of the galaxy and the light of the Astronomicon. After his death, Macarius' old generals could not hold his conquest together. Their own rivalry erupted into civil war, and the conquered territories found themselves divided into warring military empires led by Imperial Guard generals. Some of the newly assimilated worlds took the opportunity to secede from the Imperium altogether, believing that with the death of Macarius the Imperium's power had been broken. The Macarian heresy, as this period of struggle is called, was finally ended by a crusade in which almost 100 Space Marine chapters took part. It lasted for nearly 70 years after Macarius' death, a testament to the astonishing speed and wide extent of the Lord Commander Solar's conquests. Though many of Macarius' most distant conquests were lost the Imperium forever, the majority were pacified successfully. Today, these worlds form a substantial and prosperous part of the Imperium. Thanks for watching, everybody. This was just a little short story thing that's in one of the old Imperial Guard codexes, which I've remembered, and it's basically just ripping off Alexander the Great, but it's still quality. If you wouldn't mind giving this video a like, and subscribe if you're not subscribed, and share if you want to share. Otherwise, I'll be back again with more soon. Thanks for watching. Cheers.
There's a rhythm in the market. And if
thanks for joining me tonight, y'all. Whoever's here. Just gonna be doing Card Shop Sim since I can't play Space Marine 2 because my computer sucks. Oh crap. There we go.
I have stared into the eyes of insanity and met their all-consuming stare. I have done all of this for you, for your protection, and the guarantee of a future for mankind.
A brief history of Inquisitor Quixos. The distant lantern bobbed and wove amongst the stacks of the library like a will-o'-the-wisp. Inquisitor Blade stepped silently after it, his robes brushing against the packed shelves of leather-bound tomes. The flickering candle stopped 20 yards ahead, and the Inquisitor's keen hearing picked up a sibilant muttering and the sound of a heavy volume thudding onto the wood. Hastening forward, he stopped at the edge of the circle of light. The lamp had been placed on the edge of a rickety wooden table, next to the open book. His quarry was bent over the grimoire, face hidden behind the hood of his deep red cloak. A pale, skeletal finger traced along the lines of spidery writing as he read, his lips whispering the words.
Possession is but the gateway swinging in one direction.
The intruder hissed to himself. This is a forbidden text, Bladen announced, stepping into the yellow glow and laying the blade of his sword across the open pages.
Forbidden for whom?
The figure replied, a withered hand reaching to his chest and raising a golden amulet cast in the sigil of the Inquisition. You cannot be trusted, Blade told the cowled stranger. You have strayed. The other man stood up and his cowl fell about his shoulders to reveal a scarred face. His eyes glowed red in the dim light, and the right side of his face was a twisted mass of throbbing veins and open sores.
Strayed,
the hideous Inquisitor replied with scorn, his voice hissing between pointed fangs.
You are not old enough to even see the path. Never mind who might be straying.
You are corrupt, Bladen told him, raising his sword to the guard position. You have stepped too far down the path.
You have been turned by that which we seek to destroy. My loyalty remains firm, young adept.
The other man assured him with a dismissive wave of his hand.
The Emperor protects me from these corruptions. I use their power against them. It makes me stronger, the better to fight them.
What chaos touches, it corrupts, Blade stated firmly. You have become something deplorable. You have betrayed the Inquisition with your misguided course.
Betrayed the Inquisition?
The stranger snarled.
I do not expect one so young to understand my sacrifice. Of the two of us, which knows the perils of chaos the better? You, who has not experienced its lure and fought its temptations, or myself, who daily wrestles with the beast we all strive to defeat? You cannot understand the power I now control, the power I can use for the Emperor.
You cannot control chaos, argued Blade, taking a step back, contempt written across his face. How many have you cleansed who began their path to damnation with such follies in their mind?
They were not protected by the Emperor,
the stranger said confidently, staring proudly at Blade with his crimson eyes.
A gun is not evil if a man chooses to kill another with it. The power of the warp can be a force for the benefit of the Emperor and mankind, a force we need to possess if we are to prevail. Why fight with only one arm?
You are no longer human, Blade accused his fellow Inquisitor. How can you dare to claim to protect a humanity you have forsaken yourself?
I have indeed become something more than a mere man,
the scarred man replied, turning his chilling gaze on Blade.
As the Emperor himself shows us, if my sacrifice protects the humanity of others, I am willing to make that trade.
You have gone too far, Blade spat, assuming an aggressive stance, sword point lowered towards the horrific face of the other man.
The Emperor shall decide which of us is wrong,
snarled the other, whipping a rapier from its sheath and lunging at Blade. By the age of 176, Inquisitor Quixos had been responsible for the tracking down and punishment of 1,800 heretics, mutants, and aliens. In the course of carrying out his duties on Lake N15, Quixos was wounded by a demon, part of its claw shearing off and embedding in his heart. Although he vanquished the demon, Quixos found that any attempt to remove the piece of claw would kill him. In time, he learned that the claw's presence acted as a link to the warp, increasing his psychic potential, although it also slowly corrupted his body. Intrigued by this, Quixos took it upon himself to further investigate the benefits that could be gained through the use of chaos energy, earning himself something of a reputation as a rogue element amongst several other Inquisitors. When in his early 200s, Quixos encountered the Mystic Path, an organisation of traders and nobles from Maganor who were using certain warp-related items to improve their influence and increase demand for their goods. Rather than summarily destroy the cartel, Quixos observed their practices, which their forefathers had passed down to them for several generations. Quixos was further convinced that the energy of chaos could be harnessed in a correct fashion, that it was not intrinsically evil in itself, but was put to evil ends by wrongdoers. For several years, Quixos built up a relationship with their mystic path, handing several other artifacts to them for investigation. It was these experiments that were first to lead Quixos into direct conflict with another Inquisitor. Inquisitor Helgrund spent nearly the first 3 decades of his inquisitorial vocation tracing the ancient grimoire known as the Malus Codicium. When he discovered its resting place was deep within the bowels of the library of Orthelia on Zandrini Prime, he was sure his quest was over. He was dismayed to discover that a mysterious individual, only months before, had removed the Malus Codicium from the vaults. The text deals with the conjuration of entities from warp space, and the zealous Helgrund was determined that it should be destroyed. If it had fallen into the hands of a worshipper of the dark gods, the secrets it contained could unleash devastation and ruin upon a whole world. Further months of tireless endeavour brought Helgrund to Maganor and the Mystic Path. What Helgrund found appalled him. This sect wantonly used cursed artifacts, glorifying in their depravity. He was sure it was they who had stolen the Malus Codicium. With a vengeance, Inquisitor Helgrund set about destroying the Mystic Path, torturing and interrogating the Chaos worshippers he hunted down.
The island calls to those who forge their own destiny.
Why am I getting ads?
Y'all know I'm a Texan born and raised. It's my roots, my family's home.
The trail of corruption. After his pogrom had lasted for a week, Helgrund began to run into some truly disturbing adversaries. He fought against creatures half possessed by demons, as well as cultists armed with weapons that fired a bizarre, mutating projectile that rotted flesh upon impact. Helgrund and his followers fought their way to the unholy shrine of the Mystic Path, beset by mutants and psykers and other abominations against the Emperor. Helgrund, aided by the several redemptionist priests in his retinue, and an archo-flagellant released to him by the Cardinal of Maganor, set about cleansing the mountain fastness of the Mystic Path with fire and blade. He was utterly horrified to find, at its centre, a fellow Inquisitor, deformed of body and driven insane by the lure of chaos. Vowing to rid the galaxy of such a perverse guardian of the Emperor, Helgrund launched his ferocious and merciless attack. Quixos was astounded by this assault by such an inexperienced Inquisitor and considered him an ill-educated upstart. His great work had already borne much fruit, particularly the two demon hosts in his entourage. One, a vessel for the demon Cherubale, the other for an entity he hadn't quite identified, but was known as Profanity. They had assisted him in the crushing of several anti-imperial cults in the sector, their demon-powered strength and abilities an invaluable aid in combat. He had also mastered the art of creating soul guards, individuals who were psychic vacuums that could absorb magic and protect those nearby from the baneful energies of chaos. The confrontations that followed were fought bitterly. First one side, then the other gaining an advantage, until finally Quixos and Helgrund clashed in single combat. Helgrund wielded a mighty force hammer, charged with faith and purity, while Quixos's demon blade contained the ferocity of Karangar the Deathly, a being he had defeated some decades earlier, and whose essence had been bound into a sword during Quixos's recent experiments. The two battled long and hard, some Inquisitors having since likened it to the fight between Horus and the Emperor at the birth of the Imperium. They traded heavy blows, each summoning mental powers to blast the other, shredding the minds of those nearby with flickering warp energies. Helgrund called upon the Emperor's blessings and drove hard at Quixos, his force hammer smashing through his foe's psychic shield and warp wards. But Quixos was not done. Invoking the full power of Karangar, he drove his demon blade into Helgrund's guts, causing him to explode into flames and immolate. For another century, Quixos continued his research, and his findings greatly aided him in quests against the enemies of the Emperor. On Daniken too, his channeling of the demon Diabolon allowed him to breach the defences of the Orc stronghold of Mekrok, whilst many a demonic foe, immune to mortal blades, was felled by Kerengar. Finally, his opponents within the Inquisition united against him, and Inquisitor Eisenhorn declared Quixos and all his works heretic and extremis diabolus. He was hunted down and executed by a cell of 5 Inquisitors led by Eisenhorn 3 years later. Yet, there are still those who would say that Quixos was right, for he slew many demons and followers of chaos. Some say turning their own power against them. But there are those who say that nothing holy or good can come from chaos, and he was nothing more than a pawn for the warring dark gods. He had been cursed by chaos from the start on Lacan 15. His association with demonic entities and mutants were proof of his corruption.
Wait until
I have bartered horrors that chill with a gaze and tempt unreasoning terror. I have faced death, eye to eye, and blade to blade.
Thanks very much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this little brief exploration of Quixos, and I'll be doing more Eisenhorn related lore very soon. Perhaps a whole series. I don't know how that's going to work out just yet. But this is just a forerunner. Quixos is the main enemy bad guy, I guess you want to say, in the series, or at least the start of the series. And yeah, it's very much a mirror to what Eisenhorn is going to become, and something that he's aware of, because he's seen where the path of the rogue goes eventually. Thank you to everybody who is supporting the channel. Really appreciate that. You can see all your names here if you'd like to join this company of heroes.
Yeah, if you guys like Warhammer audiobooks, I highly recommend this YouTube channel. The Aborder Prince. It's some nice audiobooks to listen to in the background, you know? I think I'm gonna call it a night here. It's almost 3 in the morning. I'm an hour and a half into the stream. Yeah, it was like just not satisfied. It's like what I wanted to play, my computer will not let me play, and I was gonna do some 3D printing, but my computer decided, or the 3D files I have aren't matching what the customer wanted, so can't really do anything about that until I get back in touch with them. Yeah. So until then, I'll see y'all in the next episode, or whatever you want to call this. I'll stream again later, hopefully this week. Hopefully I'll get up earlier and not freaking 3 in the morning, you know? Maybe like 9 o'clock at night or something. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see y'all.